Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. Over the past few weeks, we've been really diving deep into some of the different class changes arriving to 11.1, releasing oh so soon, with a ton of classes receiving a bunch of revamps and refreshers over these past few weeks. Before we take a look at the classes receiving the biggest bulk of changes from hunters, mages, shamans, you name it, but there's also a handful of other specs and classes that haven't received as many adjustments but are seeing an increased performance as of recently, with what looks like Demon Hunters potentially taking center stage. At least based on current tuning, Vengeance is a guaranteed banger of a spec that's going to be a very popular pick if they stay as strong as they are right now. But it looks like even Havoc Demon Hunters potentially has a brand new bite to them, at least when it comes to Mythic Plus dungeons. Now, while Aldraki Reaver hero spec in particular isn't fan favorite, they've actually improved this hero spec greatly, allowing for both specs of Demon Hunters to get excellent bonus damage in dungeons that's actually kind of out of this world and pretty mind-blowing, to be honest, which could potentially give them competitive damage output to be relevant for season 2 content. I want to really take a look at deeper dive at some of the recent Demon Hunter changes that have caused them to gain so much more popularity. As always, if you guys want to see more class updates for 11.1, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. So, taking a look at all of these Demon Hunter changes, I'm first going to break it down from some of the more general changes, talk about the hero spec changes and exactly what direction both Demon Hunter specs are trending towards, then go over Vengeance and Havoc. We'll probably do that in the opposite order. From the general changes, we saw a variety of different little buffs for Demon Hunters in terms of just raw damage increases. Things like the Hunt that are going to be still a consequential talent heading into this new season, buffed up by 8%. A little bit more damage, no one's going to complain about that one. Immolation Aura damage has also been buffed up by 6% for both Demon Hunter specs, also solid bit of gain. Your Sigil of Fire also, or Sigil of Flame, buffed up by 6% on top of that, and Sigil of Spite, which is probably going to end up getting a decent bit of play for both Demon Hunter specs, also buffed up by 8%. Not everyone's favorite talent by any measure, but the way Demon Hunters are trending to right now, it looks like their hero talents are going to have them picking up Sigil. This one is okay, I think, to use as a Vengeance, because that burst of souls and burst of healing that it can provide is really good. It's always been a little unwieldy to use on Havoc Demon Hunter, but it's kind of like, I guess if you just swap it out in place with your Sigil of Flame whenever that's on cooldown, it's mostly like an empowered version of that. But yeah, the soul generation mechanic is something you're gonna need heading forward into 11.1, unless we see some future tuning, but it does seem like that's gonna be a talent that you'll most likely be using, because hero talents have been adjusted wildly for both specs of Demon Hunter, with Felskart having a little bit of a fallout as of recently. So they've been trying to do a lot of tuning when it comes to the Demon Surge ability, because it was the dominant playstyle for season 1, and it looks like the one to, at least it looked like it wanted to give more choices for between Aldraki and Felskart for Demon Hunters. So they started nerfing Felskart by a bunch. For Havoc Demon Hunters, Felskart really dropped off once they removed the talent called Animunes Necessary that allowed you to convert abilities that deal Frost, Nature, Fire, Arcane, and any other, like Shadow damage. Any type of magic damage would be converted to Chaos, which could benefit from their mastery directly. But with Demon Surge being an ability that deals pure fire damage, and with that talent removed, you no longer have that deep interaction with Demon Surge and Felskart, which I would feel would be like a spec that deals chaos damage, but it's just a lot of fire damage instead. So all of those fire damage elements are dampened for Havoc, and for Vengeance, while Felskart is decent, it just doesn't do as much healing as what is required for the next season's content, and it looks like Felskart is just not able to really keep up for either of the two specs. I mean, they nerfed Demon Surge at some point by 40%, then they nerfed it by 20%, and the nerfed it, buffed it, and I think pretty sure even after all the changes, it is still weaker than it initially was. Much more weaker for Havoc just because Animunes Necessary is gone completely, but for Vengeance is also just, it's okay, but not as competitive. They also took things like Burning Blades, and they initially reduced the damage of it down to 40% of listed ability damage over time. Looks like they buffed it back up a little bit, but even then, I don't see a lot of Demon Hunters really rocking Felskard as of recently. For a little bit, they did end up buffing Flamebound for a small while, where it increased your bonus damage to, or aura critical, Immolation Aura Quick Strike damage to 50% rather than 30, but it looks like they brought that back down a little bit, unless there's inconsistency from one PTR build to the next, where they had the buff in and accidentally took it out, which is something I think they should probably look into. But it looks like generally it's trending away from Felskard and towards Eldrazi. And yes, it's actually Eldrazi. For the longest time, even to this day, I still hear people calling it Eldrazi. A lot of people just call it Reaver instead, just because it's easier. But in the Vengeance Demon Hunter questline, there's this one voice line where they actually pronounce Eldrazi for just like a small little, a short sentence, a yell during a combat animation, and they call that Eldrazi. That's the only way that I can even remember it. But Eldrazi has been getting a bunch of different improvements, even though it's not a fan favorite hero talent in terms of its functionality and its glaive throw combo playstyle. It has been receiving a bunch of improvements that makes it synergize super well with both specs of Demon Hunter, even Havoc, which a lot of people generally don't really enjoy combining it together. One of those changes that really amped it up in terms of its overall quality of life is the talent of Wounded Quarry, which has been updated somewhat recently, where you expose the weakness of your target with your Reaver's Mark, causing the physical damage to any enemy to also deal a portion of the damage to the target marked by a Chaos brand, or marked by Chaos. And sometimes this ability also generates soul fragments, which it generates a decent bit. This basically means that Vengeance and Havoc Demon Hunters both are getting the ability to have funnel cleave from AoE damage from other targets, which is interesting. A mechanic that's generally well perceived in content like Mythic Plus in particular, because usually, and this is going to be very evident for the Season 2 dungeons, there's a lot of situations like this, where there's a lot of just fodder enemies, and then one big guy in between of them that needs to be nuked down as quickly as possible because he's the biggest threat. I know you want to pad and do a lot of AoE damage immediately because there's so many enemies, but that priority target needs to die instantly. So Wounded Quarry will allow Demon Hunters to have a little bit more of this funnel damage, where they can still cleave everybody around you for free and do more single target damage to that marked target. This is huge and actually generally a fantastic mechanic that players look forward to. It just allows you to have the focus damage while also being able to splash cleave everybody around you. And this, I think, fits super well with Demon Hunters in particular. What this does, though, is it allows physical damage to be cleaved to that primary target, or to be funneled back into the primary target. But Demon Hunters are interesting because a lot of their damage and abilities deal pure chaos damage. So it all depends how Blizzard codes it specifically. You see, Chaos is a very interesting magic school because it's kind of like an amalgamation of multiple elements together. Most of the times it's fire, frost, arcane, nature, shadow, sometimes holy, and sometimes physical. And it depends how Blizzard codes some of these abilities, because when you look at the breakdown, some abilities show up as pure chaos damage in red, and others show up as chromatic. Chromatic being basically the same as chaos, which means it's physical, it's holy, it's fire, it's shadow, it's all these elements together. So if Demon Hunter's chaos damage is confirmed to be physical as well as all these other elements, then technically most of your abilities should benefit Wounded Quarry greatly, causing a lot of funnel damage back to the target and a lot of focus output, which is insanely good. As for the Havoc Demon Hunter spec, they also saw a variety of damage buffs all across the board. First of all damage and abilities buffed up by 5%, which is pretty good. Even abilities like Blade Dance got buffed up by 33. Does not affect Death Sweep inside of Metamorphosis, but damage of Blade Dance outside of meta does get improved even a little. Immolation Aura saw also a 12% buff on top of that generalized Immolation Aura buff. So for Havoc Demon Hunters playing around Emo and playing around things like a Fire Inside is still a very viable pick. They also increased the effectiveness of your Mastery, even though it's not as good anymore since it took out any means necessary that allowed you to convert multiple different spell schools into pure chaos, which would be directly buffed by your Mastery. But now your Mastery just simply increases your chaos damage. They amped it up a little bit, but it does seem like Demon Hunters are kind of moving away from focusing on Mastery as your primary stat. Critical strike chance is still very solid, and some are even going to haste mostly for the resets on your glaive throw because of the talent of Screaming Brutality just to amp, and you combine it together with all the other throw glaive talents, allowing you to proc throw glaives on your own. But then there's some moments where you can actually throw glaive outside of that blade dance as well to deal additional damage, and that seems to be the lower your the shorter the cooldown of this ability, the more uses you get out of it, and the more haste you have, the shorter that CD is, because it does scale with haste, amongst a handful of other abilities like Blade Dance as well. As for the other talent adjustments, they changed things like Cycle of Hatred is now a single rank of talent point with its full value, so it's a lot easier to pick it up and make it part of any build. Even if you're not fully invested into something like Shattered Destiny, you can still add Cycle of Hatred as part of your playstyle either way, and I actually like this talent. That just means more uses of I-Beam and more overall value of the I-Beam Chaos Pure Damage, which is amazing in AoE content. Soul Scar damage has also been dropped down a little. It used to be 100%, now 80% of damage dealt as Chaos over 6 seconds. Still pretty effective and deals a decent bit of damage. They also buffed up the Havoc Demon Hunter 4 set a little bit, with a 4 set increasing your critical strike gained from sacrificing stacks of winning streak, granting you 2% critical strike chance instead of 1, which isn't crazy amount, to be honest. I mean, you can get the stacks of winning streak up to 10 times, so up to 20% more crit. I guess it's kind of nice, but critical strikes do become direct damage increases with Know Your Enemy, so at the very least it is a stat that you are likely to be utilizing. And Havoc overall right now feels pretty good, especially since this is the current Havoc build that I've seen players play on Mythic Plus on PTR. You'll notice the entire movement-based talent tree is just not even invested into at all, allowing for a no-mover build of Havoc Demon Hunter. Not everybody is going to be a fan of it. There's a portion of Demon Hunter community that loves incorporating movement-based abilities and this massive zoomy type of gameplay as part of your basic combat rotation, which really allows Demon Hunters to be separated from other melee classes, or just in general from other classes in general. It's a unique mechanic that's like only for them, and only they primarily utilize this movement and damage and can combine it together. But overall, Havoc feels incredibly good, at least in my opinion. I like this iteration of Havoc, just in terms of not having to move, and the amount of damage it can do with the Wooden Quarry has been also a ton of fun. The fast-pacedness of the Cycle of Hatred to be able to use I-Beam a lot more aggressively, a lot more regularly, has also been very, very enjoyable, and I kind of like the glaive-based builds. It's not everyone's favorite, but I found them kind of interesting. But Demon Hunters, Havoc Demon Hunters in particular, are looking to change up the pacing of their gameplay a little bit. Some players will like it and others won't. There's definitely parts in the community that really love the movement-based combat and they don't want to stand still as a DH, but it looks like you are kind of traveling in that direction. But also you're playing Eldraki, which also is not fan favorite either. But I wonder if it's something that players will eventually get used to or potentially will find fun out of, because the damage it can output, at least with the current tuning, is actually looking kind of competitive and maybe could allow Havoc Demon Hunters to be a pretty solid option going forward. I'm definitely excited to see how this spec ends up working out, especially when it comes to the overall meta for Season 2. While Havoc is a spec that saw probably the most amount of changes, Vengeance didn't see a lot, but it became, with not a lot of changes, one of the best tank specs in the game for Season 2. It's already confirmed, unless they're doing a huge set of nerfs. Vengeance is looking absolutely excellent going forward. One of the things they did for Vengeance is, and for other tanks, they buffed up the raw damage, and for Vengeance, they saw a 20% damage buff. With how aggressive Vengeance is when it comes to damage, this gives them a pretty big leg up compared to some of the other tanks out there, because it allows them to utilize all of their damage components and damage-based talents to truly unleash some of the biggest output, at least from what we've seen so far on the PTR. As for the actual talent changes, there weren't too many. Vengeance saw Fallout get adjusted so it scales better with lower target counts, allowing for at least one guaranteed soul fragment when fighting a singular target, while still allowing it to have scaling within AoE. They also found a way to buff up Feed the Demon by turning it from a 2 talent point cost talent into a 1 talent point cost, allowing you to regen the cooldown of demon spikes by 0.35 seconds per soul fragment consumed instead of the original 0.25 or 0.5 if you invested 2 points into it, making it much easier for most Demon Hunters to pick up Feed the Demon as part of their basic gameplay and part of the basic rotation, overall improving their survivability, but also making the whole managing of demon spikes a little bit less tedious than it previously was. was. Besides this though, majority of Edge Demon Hunters is simply allied together as the Eldrazi Reaver with a lot of their survivability based talents, as Eldrazi has excellent livability capabilities. Like in terms of just being able to be super self-sustaining and self-sufficient, not necessarily requiring a healer to babysit you the entire time. Adventure Demon Hunters and Eldrazi are very, very good when it comes to that personal self-survivability. I mean, the amount of healing you could do as Eldrazi with all those souls generated and the combos you can pull off is actually kind of wild and out of this world. And a lot of Demon Hunters have started to gravitate towards Eldrazi, since it looks like a lot of the tank busters and heavy hitters from tank-specific targeted abilities have been wildly reduced for Season 2. So a lot of the dungeons and Mythic Plus are not as scary for the tank, but you are taking consistent damage, and as long as you can maintain your health bar throughout that consistent damage, then you should be good to go. This allows your healer more time to heal the rest of the group or focus on damage, which can help bring down the current trash pack you're fighting or the current boss you're fighting just a little bit faster, and ends up being better when it comes to the push environment specifically. But even though Veg Demon Hunters are looking really good for the push content, it'll likely end up, if they're keeping them as they are right now, trickle down into the rest of the seasonal dungeons, allowing Veg Demon Hunters to possibly be one of the best slot tanks heading forward into Season 2. They definitely had a fantastic start throughout PTR, but as with all PTR content, not all of these things are final until the final tuning for class changes has been finalized during the end of development of this update, which won't be for like 2 more weeks. So they could potentially completely gut Vengeance, but hopefully we won't be seeing that, as it's actually been really enjoyable seeing Vengeance Demon Hunter. Hopefully we'll still see a little bit of that tank diversity into Season 2, as technically, since tanks are focused on survivability, all tanks have a variety of talents improving their defenses, and technically all tanks should be pretty competitive when it comes to trying just to survive in dungeons without the need for a healer. Maybe not Protection Warrior, since they have probably the most limited healing out of all the tanks in the game, but technically all tanks should be fairly even when it comes to just pure defensive play and into the Season 2 content. Of course, Vengeance Demon Hunters do have extra utility with their sigils, which I think is going to give them a slight edge, again, unless we see some future tuning that may potentially take away some of that lead going forward. As always though, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys did enjoy this update. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very much appreciate that. Also, join our Discord community, probably the best place to discuss all of the newest class changes as soon as they appear over on the PTR. As always, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in our next one.